Hey, I'm Matt, founder at Crux. Over the past 15 years, I've been working for various D2C brands in-house, operator side, as a head of growth. Most recently being Fussy, we were a refillable deodorant brand. I helped scale that brand from 2.2 million GMV to just under 25 million in about 3.5 years. A lot of those learnings have gone into the frameworks and the processes we use at Crux. And one of the key things that kind of stemmed from that experience and some of the brands that we work with is this notion of metric overload. So, there's so many metrics you can track these days across various e-com platforms and marketing platforms. You've got Shopify, you've got Meta, you've got TikTok, YouTube, all of this stuff. And it just sort of compounds into this mess of metrics and KPIs that you're trying to track, and you're trying to figure out, which ones actually are of value and which ones aren't. So yeah, the kind of the sad story is that most brands that I see and we work with track upwards of 40 metrics, when there's actually only 6 or 7 of those metrics that actually influence decisions. So this is why we have this 5-step metric audit process. The end of this video, you're going to have a really clear demonstration, really clear process for taking that hodgepodge of metrics that you're tracking into a clean set of hopefully a maximum of 12 that really influence decisions, drive growth, and is transparent for the whole team. So let's dive in. So the problem that I mentioned, there's this metric overload issue. I mentioned 30, we often see upwards of 40, 50 metrics tracked by brands that we work with. Let's say it's 38. Of those 38 in this example, maybe only 6 of those are actually the ones where you're using to make decisions or influence decisions. So it creates this ratio of, for every single metric that's actually providing signal and providing value for decisions, there's 6 that are just noise, that are just causing unnecessary cognitive load, that are distracting. And that all helps sort of contribute to this, quite often, operators that we speak to are spending an hour a day just figuring out, okay, what happened to the performance yesterday? What actually moved the needle? Do I need to go and sort of look at my Facebook campaigns, my Google campaigns? Was it seasonality? This kind of triage process has just become so messy. We're seeing brands spend upwards of 21 hours on that a month, an hour a day. And that's taking away from things like planning, from creating strategy. It's just looking at metrics and figuring out what's happened, which in 2026 is not really where you want to be spending your time. So one of the concepts that helps sort of frame this issue and this problem is Miller's Law. And if you don't know Miller's Law, it's this psychological principle. It was a study, I think it's from the 50s. You can look it up. But basically, it was discovered that your working memory at any given time can only handle 5 to 9 items. So just setting that aside and just thinking about the 38 metrics, the 40 metrics that we just spoke about versus the maximum of 9 that you can hold in working memory, there's a big disparity there, right? So this whole idea and this whole premise is really about trying to reduce cognitive load, because when you're responsible for making 300, 400K decisions with the budget, you don't want to have those distractions. You don't want to have that sort of that vagueness and that sort of wishy-washy dilution of, okay, what if it impacts XYZ, when probably XYZ is not even really important or not even really influencing the key growth of the business. And something that compounds that and has contributed to that is what's known as vanity metrics. And you've probably heard this term before, and it's kind of come about from, I guess, lots of data being available across lots of different marketing platforms. So quite often brands marketing leaders and growth leaders will, chat about, or platforms will chat about, okay, Instagram, like social media followers, likes, impressions, reach. But in reality, if that stuff grows 15%, what does it actually, what does it mean to you? What's the actual consequence of that? So we've kind of fallen into this trap of tracking what's easy to measure rather than actually the stuff that matters and the stuff that drives growth. And that's because of the very nature sometimes of tracking this stuff that matters. It's quite difficult, right? When you have all these different platforms and all these tools, to be able to sort of join the dots and bring that into a central place and actually analyze the change is not an easy task. So we think of it within this frame in terms of KPIs and metrics. So having one key North Star metric, that's the real sort of signifier of value that you deliver to your customers. We won't go into too much. I won't go into too much detail on that in this video. We have videos about identifying your North Star metric. From that North Star, you're typically going to have 2 to 3 drivers, growth drivers. So these are the things that actually the inputs that actually form your North Star. So think about it as a maths formula or an actual equation of that North Star. What are the actual key things that sort of contribute? And at the bottom, or the lastly, we have the growth levers, the active levers that actually contribute to those drivers. So one North Star, 2 to 3 key drivers, 5 to 8 active levers. And this really brings the attention back to a core set of metrics and KPIs. Something that also contributes, you've got vanity, but you've also got this sort of platform first approach versus model first approach. So quite often operators and leaders will default to the KPIs and the metrics that they see within the platforms that they most use, right? So, Shopify has native analytics. When you log in, it's going to show you conversion rate, orders, that kind of stuff. Meta is going to show you reach, impressions, same thing for Google, TikTok, etc., etc. So ultimately, you can end up with a list of 50 metrics within your platforms pretty easily. But our question and our sort of mind comes from, okay, that's great. That's what the platforms find important. That's what's important to them. But what's actually important for your business? And that typically stems from your forecast model or your growth model, right? So it's really thinking about the inputs in that model and the assumptions within that model and tracking them against reality. And that's going to give you the indicators for where you need to course correct, for what's off track, what's on track. And that's typically things like, retention. You're typically going to have an assumption for month 1, maybe month 6 retention. You're going to have assumptions around, if you're a multi-SKU business, what that SKU split looks like. So the percentage between those product splits, that's going to have a big impact on your average order value. If you're a subscription business, you're probably going to have some kind of assumption in there around the percentage of first-time customers picking subscription versus not. So being a one-time customer, that's going to have a big consequences. So you want to be identifying those key sort of model inputs, and those are your model first metrics, and you want to be moving to tracking those and surfacing those and highlighting those, instead of just relying on that platform metrics and what they see as important. So this all helps reduce that metric overload and get you to that sort of, we say that ideal output of 12 metrics, cutting your triage time. So in reality, kind of, how does this look like? How do we go about sort of doing this metric audit? So yeah, one of the first ones is figuring out your vanity metrics and removing those from your reporting, reducing that cognitive overload. So an easy way to do this is just taking each of those metrics and asking these 3 questions. So does it help you make decisions? can you actually influence it through repeated actions? And lastly, is it easily mappable to your growth drivers or your North Star metric? If you can't answer yes to each of these three questions, in reality, it's probably going to be a vanity metric and you want to get rid of it. So, yeah, the uncomfortable truth is most reporting that we see, about 7% to be precise, is actually vanity metrics. It's not influencing decisions. It's stuff that you can't really test on, you can't repeat, you can't optimize, and it doesn't really translate into growth drivers or North Star metrics. So, if you're just answering yes to two of these or one of these and you still think it's an important metric, I'd say move that to a monthly reporting cadence that you can just have for context, but don't have it as your central sort of KPI set that you're tracking and using and sort of digesting on a daily basis, because it's just going to add to the confusion and the noise. So typically some examples of those that you will see are social followers, page views. So both of these, they don't really contribute to decision making. You can't really map them to growth drivers. You want to be thinking about the opposite of those. So things that influence growth. So growth metrics, examples, conversion rate. You can use conversion rate to diagnose where an issue lies on your website. If you have conversion rate for each step of your funnel, repeat purchase rate. So that's a key way of seeing whether customers are actually getting value from that first purchase. Are they coming back and buying? So there's a clear sort of intent and useful signal there for decision making. And that's really, likely going to map to some of your key growth driver, or in some instances, this can even be your North Star metrics. So just thinking about those questions and asking those for each of those metrics will really help you identify vanity metrics from growth metrics. And then the second step is classifying into platform versus model. So we spoke a little bit about this, but going through your reporting, go through your KPIs and really asking that question of, okay, does this exist just because it's an output from a marketing platform? Is it just because Facebook reports this, Google reports this, TikTok reports this? Or is it actually because my business requires it? It's from our model, it's from our forecasting, it's a key input, it's a key assumption. So my main takeaway here would be really ruthless, right? You want to be killing anything that sort of you're unsure of as the default action. So you've got rid of your vanity metrics. You want to start thinking of this pyramid that we spoke about earlier. So it's that one North Star metric. It's those 2 to 4 key drivers that form that North Star. So like I said, think about that formula. What's the breakdown of that North Star? What has to be put together to form that North Star? Those are typically your key drivers. And then the difference with the growth levers, I never know how you say that, growth levers, is those are the things that are actually the operational inputs. So it's the stuff that the team can work on, actionable things, number of tests, number of emails, number of ads, that kind of stuff that are actually going to be executed and ramped up or ramped down with a view of trying to influence and trying to move these key drivers. So an additional way of removing metrics and tightening that belt after you've mapped out that pyramid is thinking about, okay, when was the last time this specific metric actually influenced a decision within the team or within the business? If you can't, I would be a bit more ruthless than we're saying here. And actually, if you've not used that within the past sort of 3 to 6 months, then that's not really a important metric or KPI that you want to be, utilizing or using one of those 9 memory slots for, right? So get rid of it. You want your dashboard to be triggering action and sort of decision thinking rather than just clutter, noise, observation, dilution, causing you to be like, okay, I need to go check that in Meta, in TikTok, whatever the platform might be. So you really want it to be a central place where you can make those decisions from the data that you're seeing there and then. Because, otherwise, dashboard just full of metrics you never act on. It's just a screensaver, right? It's just paying lip service. You're just going through the motions. So hopefully you're coming to this place now where you've got this list of metrics. We call it the 12 metric rule. Ideally, you want to be having a maximum of 12 metrics. If you follow this pyramid, you should get there if you're keeping within these bounds. But yeah, one North Star, 4 drivers, 7 levers, giving you a maximum of 12. Ideally, you want to be less than that, but yeah, it's a big improvement from most of the brands that we see, and from my experience. I'm guilty of a lot of this stuff. So use this framework, and you can get down to that, or as close to that metric as possible, and really reduce that cognitive load, speed up decisions. Ideally, you want to be have most of that metric set in mind while making decisions. If you're really struggling to remember what they are, you probably got too many, and you need to be cutting. So how do you get started on all of this? So you want to be going to your dashboards, whether that's SaaS tools, whether that's Excel sheets, Google Sheets, collate all of the metrics, all of the KPIs that you're using across your meetings, across the business, into a single spreadsheet. First off, you're going to want to do the vanity metric test. So ask those 3 questions that we went through. Determine whether it's a platform metric or a growth metric. You want to be removing anything that's a platform metric that's not actually helping you make decisions or not actually directly linked to growth within the business. You want to be running that influence test. So what we said here, when was the last time you actually used it to make a decision? And then hopefully you're left over with a much shorter list than what you began with. You're going to take that list, you're going to determine your North Star metric. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, or I'm not going to go into the detail of how to do that. We've got other videos on that, but that's ultimately the signal of value to your customer. So how can you tell whether a customer, or how can you tell whether you've actually delivered value to the customer? Once you've got that, you're going to map out that pyramid. So you're going to go down to the key driver level and really figure out what are the 4 things that contribute to that North Star. And then of those 4 things, what are the levers? What are the actions? What is the stuff we can tangibly do operationally? What are the operational inputs that go into those drivers? Usually it's around, it's thinking of things like tests that you can run. It's email flows that you can optimize and manage. So think of it on that operational level. And then lastly, it's this, archive, essentially. Default to deletion, default to removing where possible. That's really going to clean that list up for you. So what are some of the common pitfalls that come from this process? So confusing interesting with influential, right? So, just because it's something that we think is interesting, or something that's been useful in the past, default to deletion. If it's not actually influencing things, get rid of it. Keeping metrics just in case, that's kind of an example where you're like, well, it could be something in the future that becomes important. If that's a reason why you're tracking a metric, it's not useful. So you will very quickly realize when there's a metric missing, or when you don't have the answers to something, and that's when you go and you seek and you add things to the dashboard. So do it that way around rather than starting with too much. It's much better to start in the place of, okay, there's not enough here, we need to fill in some gaps, because those gaps that you fill in are going to be focused on the stuff that you actually value and that you're missing for those decisions that you need to make. So err on the side of removing as much as possible to start with. Don't have things in there just in case. And yeah, we mentioned a few times, so letting platform defaults drive selection. So don't just track and have something because a platform is reporting it. Have it because it's model, it's coming from your business model, it's coming from your forecast, it's something that is used during decision making. Yeah, just because Shopify reports it doesn't mean you need to. Okay, so you've got the system up and running. What does success look like? What do you start to see happen? So one of the key benefits is hopefully you're going to see this time to triage really reduce, right? So that sort of 60-minute dance you do every morning figuring out what's going on is going to drastically reduce. You've got a clean 12 metric set that you're looking at and you're reviewing each day. What's moved, what hasn't, where does my focus need to go? And the benefit of that is faster decision making, right? So you can identify issues, opportunities quicker, and really sort of speed up that decision making process. And part of what contributes to that as well is that cognitive load. So we know the startup world, the D2C world, the ecom world is crazy. It's manic. There's loads of stuff you need to be doing every day. It doesn't help if you're just tracking stuff for the sake of tracking it. So ability to make decisions faster and increased decision velocity comes from reducing that cognitive load, right? Really going back and thinking about Miller's law. So reducing that list of 50 metrics that we're tracking down to as close as possible. We can get to a maximum of 9. More often than not, you're going to be sitting around the 12 point, and that's fine. And that's because you're knowing the stuff that you're trying to influence, right? You can have it on a post-it. You know, easy when you're making decisions how stuff's going to pan out. But ultimately, the real win from this whole process is, yeah, making better decisions faster. Yes, you're saving time. Yes, you're reducing reporting time, all of that stuff, but that contributes to the real impact, which is making decisions faster, and making more of those decisions in the same period of time. Great. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for watching. If you found it useful, please give it a like. Subscribe if you're interested to be alerted when we post more content like this. And we regularly go into operator focused content with a real sort of data led approach. I post a lot on LinkedIn, so check me out there as well, Matt Lever. And also there's more information about what we do and the services we offer on our website, gocrux.io. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.